"Officer, I want you to think very carefully about what you're about to do." Cop said, "Get out of the car. Now." Driver said, "I'm giving you one last chance to walk away from this." Cop said, "That's it. Hands behind your back." Sound of handcuffs clicking. What happened in the next 4 hours would change everything. It was a quiet afternoon on Highway 9, the kind of day where nothing happens, where officers sit in their cars, drink cold coffee, and watch the world pass by. Officer Barnes had been on duty for 6 hours. No incidents, no arrests, nothing worth writing about. Then a black sedan glided past him. No speeding, no swerving, no broken taillight, nothing. But something about that car made Barnes sit up straight. He put down his coffee, turned on his lights, and pulled out. The sedan stopped immediately, smoothly, perfectly, right at the edge of the road. No panic, no hesitation. Barnes should have noticed that. Guilty people don't stop like that. He walked up slowly, hand resting on his belt. The window came down halfway. Inside sat a man in a neat, dark suit, both hands visible on the steering wheel. His license and registration were already pressed flat against the glass, ready before Barnes even asked. Barnes signaled for the window to come all the way down. The man said that halfway was sufficient for conversation. Barnes told him again, all the way down. The man calmly said he could hear just fine, and so could Barnes. Barnes felt something tighten in his chest. He pointed at the documents and told the man to hand them over. The man kept them flat against the glass and said that Texas law only required him to exhibit his license, not surrender it. Barnes stared at him for a moment. This guy was quoting the law. Barnes hated that. Barnes asked if the man knew why he had been pulled over. The man said he would remain silent on that. Barnes asked if he had any idea how fast he was going. The man said everything was on his dash cam. Barnes asked where he was coming from. The man said he was exercising his Fifth Amendment right. Barnes stepped back and radioed dispatch. He stood by his car for a few minutes, fingers tapping on the roof. When he came back, something had shifted in his eyes. He told the man to step out of the vehicle. The man asked, clearly and calmly, whether he was being detained or was free to go. Barnes told him again, "Step out." The man asked the same question again, "Detained or free to go?" Barnes grabbed the door handle. The man spoke one last time. He told Barnes to think very carefully about what he was about to do. He reminded him that his dashcam was recording. Barnes's dashcam was recording, and that whatever happened next would not disappear. Barnes pulled the door open anyway. The man stepped out without a word, hands raised, no resistance, no argument. When the handcuffs clicked into place, he turned and looked directly into the dashcam. Not angry, not afraid, just calm, like a man who already knew exactly how this story was going to end. Barnes put him in the back of the patrol car and radioed his partner. "Another obstruction case," he said. In the back seat, the man looked out the window at the highway disappearing behind them. There was the faintest trace of a smile on his face. At the station, Barnes walked his man up to the front desk like he was delivering good news. Told the desk officer he had a Route 9 pickup. Obstruction, failure to comply. The desk officer looked at the man in the suit, then back at Barnes, and said nothing. But there was something in his expression, a hesitation, that Barnes ignored completely. The man was taken to a small holding room. He walked in, sat down, placed his hands in his lap, and looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4:15 in the afternoon. Barnes was in the break room 20 minutes later, laughing with his partner over cups of tea. He was telling the story of the guy who thought he knew everything about the law. His partner kept shaking his head and laughing. They both agreed. These types were the worst. All that attitude, no results. Meanwhile, the desk officer was staring at his screen. He had typed the name from the license, James Carter. He searched it once, then again, then a third time. Then he sat very still for about 2 minutes, reading everything on the screen in front of him. Then he picked up the phone and called Captain Miller. He didn't explain anything over the phone. He just said, "Captain, you need to come down here right now. Please." Captain Miller had been on the force for 22 years. He had seen a lot of things. But the way the desk officer had sounded on the phone, that specific tone, made him walk faster than usual. He came downstairs, took the printed file from the desk officer's hands, and started reading as he walked toward the holding room. He stopped outside the door. Through the small glass window, he could see the man inside, sitting perfectly straight, eyes closed, completely still, like someone who had done this before, not as a detainee, but as someone waiting for the other side to figure things out. Miller opened the door. The man opened his eyes. No surprise, no relief, no anger. Miller asked if he was all right, if he needed anything. The man said he just needed some answers. Miller sat down across from him. He opened his notebook, uncapped his pen, and then looked up and asked the question that had been sitting in his throat since he read the file. He asked the man who exactly he was. There was a long pause. The man reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket. He took out a card. He placed it on the table, carefully, precisely, face up. Miller picked it up. James Carter, constitutional law attorney, state bar license, number 001. Former federal prosecutor, 14 years of service. Miller read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set it down very gently on the table, stood up, and walked to the door. Barnes was standing in the hallway, still looking relaxed, still convinced he had done everything right. Miller told him to leave his badge and gun on the desk. Told him he was suspended pending investigation. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that is worse than shouting. Barnes started to explain. The guy was being difficult. He was just doing his job. He didn't do anything wrong. Miller said one more time. Badge, gun, desk, now. The door closed. Inside the room, Carter spoke without any anger. No raised voice, no dramatic pauses. He laid out every violation the way a surgeon works. Precise, clean, no unnecessary movement. First, the demand to surrender his license. Texas Transportation Code Section 521.025 states that a driver must display a license upon request. Display, not hand over. Barnes had demanded something the law never required. Second, the order to exit the vehicle. Without lawful detention established, without reasonable suspicion of a crime, that order had no legal foundation. Third, the arrest itself. The charge was obstruction. But Carter had complied with every single legal requirement. He had displayed his documents. He had remained silent, which is a constitutional right, not a crime. He had not resisted. There was no obstruction. There was only an officer who did not like being told no. Fourth, the use of physical force during an unlawful arrest, a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable seizure. Miller had stopped writing halfway through. He was just listening. Carter leaned forward slightly. He said that this case was not really about him. He had the knowledge to protect himself. He knew exactly what to say and what not to say. But most people sitting in that car, alone on a highway, without a law degree, they don't know. And that silence, that ignorance of their own rights, is what gets people into trouble they never deserved. Out in the hallway, Barnes waited. The confidence had drained out of him slowly, like air from a tire. By the time Miller came back out, Barnes already knew something had gone very wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. Miller walked past him without making eye contact, then stopped, turned around. He told Barnes he had unlawfully arrested a 14-year federal prosecutor, that the dashcam footage had already been pulled, that Internal Affairs would be in contact by tomorrow morning, and that until that investigation was complete, Barnes was not to set foot inside this building in uniform. Barnes stood there with nothing to say. Through the glass of the holding room window, he could see Carter standing now, an officer carefully removing his handcuffs. Carter looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. There was no anger in Carter's face, no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a look that said, "I told you to think carefully." Barnes looked away first. Outside the station, a small crowd of reporters had gathered. Someone had made a call. Carter stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and stood in the afternoon light for a moment before speaking. A reporter asked why he hadn't simply told the officer who he was from the beginning. Carter said that question itself was the problem. His rights did not come from his job title. They did not come from his law degree or his years of federal service. They came from the same place everyone else's rights came from: citizenship. The moment rights only protect people who can prove they deserve them, they stop being rights at all. Another reporter asked what message he had for law enforcement. Carter said that a badge is a responsibility, not a weapon. That the law exists to protect people, all people, not just the ones who are easy to deal with. That the day an officer arrests someone for knowing their rights is the day that officer has forgotten their own duty.